fellow Rotarians, distinguished guests, it is an absolute pleasure to be here welcoming you to what is the next great exciting time in Rotary. We have a very, very esteemed panel this evening. None other than so I'm claiming you, Valarie, our very own Vice President Valarie Wafer, who is the authority on DEI in our district. And of course, my friend Kerryann Ifill, she's from my Rotary Club, and most certainly one of the most outstanding Rotarians we have in our club. And of course, Wendy John. What a pleasure it is. DEI is the buzzword. So I definitely have chosen a great chair in past President Katrina Sam, who will moderate this afternoon. And I am really looking forward to the session. Very, very interactive, and welcome and do enjoy. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, DG Sonia. I'd just like to quickly recognize District Governor-elect Leslie, who just joined us. And now, PP Katrina, take it away. Over to you.
Thank you, District Trainer. Fellow Rotarians, good evening and welcome to our district discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion. As DG Sonia has said, it's a term and our concept that has become very, very popular, and we are hearing more about it every day. At this point, it seems as if every organization is doing something or thinking of doing some DEI initiative. And by now, you must all be asking yourself, why? Why all the fuss and focus? And why is Rotary International prioritizing the DEI, as we call it? At the end of our discussion this evening, I expect that we will each have a better perspective of why focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion matters, and specifically why it matters to organizations like our own. This evening, as the DG has already alluded to, I think we have assembled an amazing panel of speakers who will each share their perspective, expertise, and their experience over the next just about 75 minutes. And I am going to introduce the panel. I hope our third panelist has made it. I'm not sure if somebody can check, but I will go ahead and introduce them. I will start first. Yeah. Yes, excellent. I will start first with Rotarian Kerryann Ifill. Having lost her sight at age 5, Rotarian Kerryann describes herself as, and her life as being a testimony to God's perfect plan of our life, despite our own imperfections and perhaps understanding his workings. Rotarian Kerryann first came to the Barbados public's attention at age 6 in the International Year of the Disabled stamp issue. She graced the 10-cent stamp. So we have a very famous person among us that graced the 10-cent stamp. And at the age of 14, she once again came to the public's recognition as the first totally blind child to enter the Commonwealth Secondary School, where she spent the next 6 years fully participating in all of the school's activities. After leaving Commonwealth School, she enrolled in the Ifill campus of the University of the West Indies and graduated in 1999 with an upper second-class honors in sociology and psychology. Her academic pursuits saw her also enrolling in the master's program of Durham Business School in 2003 and completing her studies in 2006. Professionally, Kerryann worked with the Women in Development Program, Parents for Education for Development in Barbados, until she spent 10 years on the staff of the Barbados Council for the Disabled, which is a non-governmental umbrella body for several organizations. In 2008, Kerryann was appointed to the Senate of Barbados and subsequently elected to serve as the Deputy President of the Senate. Kerryann was later appointed as the President in March of 2012. Yes. Kerryann became the youngest person to hold this post, as well as the first female and the only person with a disability to serve in this office which she held until 2018. On April 21st, 2018, she was also elected as the president of the National United Society of the Blind and is the chairperson of the advisory panel on disabilities for CARICOM, which supports the work of CARICOM's special rapporteur. So that's our first panelist. Our second panelist, who's just joined us, Wendy John. Wendy is the head of Global Diversity and Inclusion for Fidelity Investments, which is a leading provider of investment management, retirement planning, portfolio guidance, brokerage, benefits, outsourcing, and other financial products and services to more than 26 million individuals, institutions, and international and financial intermediaries. Wendy assumed the role of head of global diversity and inclusion in 2020, and she leads the effort to ensure that Fidelity is a workplace and a service provider where everyone can fully be themselves. She's responsible for creating and attracting a more diverse workforce, tapping into the power of their differences to develop and retain talent, and creating a culture of inclusion and showcasing Fidelity's reputation and brand as an inclusive employer and service provider. Wendy is a 24-year Fidelity veteran. I'm sure when you see Wendy, you probably figured she started working at age 10, but she is a 24-year Fidelity veteran who has served in several key leadership roles across the relationship management, client services and operation, global workforce strategy, program management, and implementing and benefits consulting. And Wendy is a global road warrior. She has lived in 3 countries and racked up millions of air miles for work and personal travel. Born in Trinidad and Tobago, she moved to Canada to attend the University of Waterloo after high school, and she graduated with joint honors, bachelor's in mathematics, in actuarial science and economics. So welcome, Wendy. And our most distinguished panelists, Valarie K. Wafer, Rotary International Director 2020 to 2022, and Rotary Vice President 2020 to 2021 to 2022. Valarie joined Rotary in 2005 in order to fuel her passion for making an impact that matters. She was District Governor of RI District 7070, covering the Greater Toronto Area in 2013-2014. Currently, her home club is the Rotary Club of Collingwood, South Georgiana Bay, RI District 7010, but having just moved back to Burlington, where she grew up, Valarie will be joining District 7080 on July 1, 2022. RI Director Valarie's journey as a Rotarian involves a number of international roles. She is an international trainer, a member of the host organizing committee for Toronto's 2018 Rotary International Convention. She has represented the Rotary International presidents in several countries, including the United States, Norway, and Nigeria. And currently, she is an elected member of the Rotary International Board of Directors for 2020-2022. As the chair of Rotary's International Global Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Task Force, Valarie brings a strong background of learned and lived experiences on this very important topic. Valarie and her husband of 35 years, Mark, are Paul Harris Fellows, Bequest Society members, and major donors to the Rotary Foundation. So fellow Rotarians, I think we can all agree that we do have quite an exciting panel, and I would now encourage you to welcome them by using your emoji buttons to make them feel our warm Rotary welcome from District 7030. So, Wendy, I hope you're ready. I'm going to ask you to lead off our discussion on the importance of DEI for large organizations, what it looks like in action in a large organization, and perhaps to share your perspective on why organizations have now prioritized DEI in the last few years. You Wendy will be followed by Rotarian Kerryann, who will make her contribution immediately after, just sharing some of her lived experiences, especially as to how she has experienced Rotary thus far, and perhaps some insight into her experience as a person with disabilities in the Senate of Barbados. And the climax of our panel discussion and presentation will be, of course, RI Vice President Valarie Wafer, who will lead us in a discussion on what Rotary has done in DEI and why, and share with us, how Rotary International plans to prioritize DEI going forward, and perhaps what some of clubs can do in alignment of Rotary International's global plans. I will stop speaking and invite Wendy to take over the session. Wendy?
Sure thing. So thank you so much, Katrina, and it's an honor to be here this evening with all of you and speak a little bit and share some insight into the work that I have the honor and privilege to lead every day at Fidelity Investments for our over 60,000 employees worldwide. I probably will start a little bit. I sometimes try not to assume that everyone knows what we're talking about when we are talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so probably the most simple way to describe it is, diversity is really oftentimes people focus on our differences. I actually would suggest that we should talk about not only our differences, our similarities, and maybe the things that make us unique. And so in the construct that I operate in, which is primarily a North American construct, although with a global perspective, we're often talking about visible and invisible differences. So the visible differences being things like age, race, ethnicity, gender, which sometimes is visible, not always, as well as other dimensions. Invisible kind of gets into when we're talking about different abilities, as well as religion, place of origin, and other factors that may be very important to who we are as a person and our identity, but not so obvious for people to be able to identify just by looking at you. Then let's talk about inclusion next, and then I'll come back to equity. So inclusion is really about, about the ability to take those differences, respect them, value them, and create environments where everybody feels like they can show up as their authentic self, their full self, in a way that it will be valued and that they do not actually have to cover or censor or hide certain aspects in order to be treated fairly. And last but certainly not least, there's been a lot of conversation about equity. And equity is really more about, many of you maybe have seen the visual, right? Equity is not the same as equality. Right? Equality is what a lot of us have strove for in the past, where, you want to make sure that everyone has the same, gets the same goods and services. Maybe that's the best way to describe it. But it's not so much about goods and services. Everyone isn't necessarily starting from the same place. And so therefore, it's about providing everyone with what the goods and services they need to achieve the specific outcome. And so it's really important to spend the time understanding the diversity of each individual, what they would need to feel included, and then creating practices and infrastructure that would allow for everyone to have that same opportunity. For me personally, and I know there are some folks I saw just in the chat that are from, that also share, maybe the history. I am originally from Trinidad, but as Katrina knows, my mother is from Barbados. And so I spent much of my childhood not only living in Trinidad, but also, spending summers in Barbados. And sometimes we find ways to differentiate ourselves based literally on miles of differences, right? Or kilometers, depending on your scale. And so I grew up and lived in central Trinidad, but I also only went to school in Port of Spain, Trinidad, which literally feels like I lived in two countries when I talk about some of the experiences and things that I was exposed to. And so because I grew up and lived in Chaguanas, I had tremendous exposure to East Indian culture. And many different religions. And I think that is true for a lot of us in Trinidad, but my entire lived experience, I think, is one that now translates wholly to the work that I do every day. growing up, I had to study religion. So we read the Bhagavad Gita, the Quran, the Bible. We didn't read it with any particular stigma at the time, and instead saw a lot of connection points. That changes your anchoring of how you might see the world. I think there's also a lot to be said when you are growing up on like a really small dot of an island and you're looking out externally, you see the world very differently. And so that's also why place of origin is super important for all of us, right? We have pride in some of our cultural backgrounds. Sometimes that actually is more of your identity than the physical attributes that you have or the way that people assess you. And so for me, I tell this story that, my first experience with, let's call it DE&I, and some of this awareness came much later in life, was because I wanted to study actuarial science and I was really good at math. In Trinidad, that meant I had to go to an all-boy high school for 2 years. So imagine at the age of 16, you've been in a school with girls for 5 years, and suddenly you're thrust into a boys' school with 1,000 boys. I happened to go to a school that had girls from other schools, so they weren't people that I had grown up with or who knew me. And I think people were very surprised to find that someone either with my background, the school I had come from, was actually one of the best people at math in that curriculum. And that invited a lot of different behavior, right? And for me, that experience was actually more so about gender diversity than about racial and ethnic diversity, right? And what was really interesting about it was I got the opportunity to observe. I mean, I had an older brother. I'd been around a lot of, groups of older boys and whatnot. But in that school environment, I also learned about how men and women maybe solve differences differently, right? It was amazing to see it. I had never seen that before. You're arguing about something heated, seemingly at each other's throats, and then the cafeteria bell rings. And suddenly they're going to the cafeteria to eat together, which is not something I had ever seen before. It was very insightful. And I often tell people that I point back to that 2-year experience to prepare me for everything I experienced in college, going to Canada. I had been there before, but I had not lived there, right? Moving to the US with a totally different experience. You learn to navigate different environments. You don't realize that you actually are morphing yourself, or you're kind of hiding certain things because you watch other people's behavior, you see certain things that get either accepted or rewarded. And before you know it, you are one person in one environment and a different person in another environment, right? That's about inclusion, right? If you feel like there's something about the authentic you that will be rejected by an environment, you might choose to mask that. That's what many people do every day. Consider the tax that takes and the toll that takes. And if you're spending all of your time and effort focusing on those things and making sure people don't find out this thing, you're probably not bringing the best of you, the best thinking, right? Because you're using calories to sort of, prevent people from uncovering some of these other things that maybe are not as widely accepted. When it comes to the equity piece, it's just really important for us to recognize, and it's going to be different for each of you in the various territories that you are in, that we are not all experiencing the world in the same way. There's lots of analogies out there about this pandemic and that it suddenly is the great equalizer, but we're not experiencing the pandemic in the same way. Right? You could only look at, say, distribution of vaccines as a demonstration of that. But I don't want to get into that political conversation. I'm just saying, though, perhaps a better example I'll give you. My brother and I grew up in the same household, in the same nuclear family. I'm sure many of you have the same experience. There are certain events that we talk about, and we have completely different recollections of what occurred. But we both experienced the same event. No difference in the facts, but our interpretation is different. Why is our interpretation different? Well, because we have different experiences, and our experiences inform how we see the world. And we don't realize that our brains are really very powerful. And there is this idea and concept around unconscious bias. And what we don't recognize is that every day we take in millions of inputs, right? You know, you taste something that doesn't taste good to you. The next time you have that again, your brain immediately is having an instantaneous reaction, or you could smell that same thing and you're in a different place, right? We don't tell ourselves every time, not all of us, that we need to get up to go somewhere. We don't go through that whole thought process. That's how quickly your brain is working on other things as well. So if you had a bad interaction with someone who fits a particular profile, let's not even make it about any physical attribute, but I don't know, someone from a particular geography. And then someone is talking to you and they say, yep, you know, they're telling you all these wonderful things. And then they mention casually, because they don't know your history, they're also from that same geography. You immediately, it's just human nature. You are back in that situation, right? Human beings, there's this behavioral science concept of loss aversion. We remember the things and the times and the instances where we lost something more so than when we gained something. So we all can remember probably how we felt when we lost, like, you know, a $50 bill or whatever. And you don't remember the time when you got an extra $50 bill in quite the same way. You just don't want to repeat that lost situation. So if you had a negative interaction with someone, and then somebody else triggers that same or the same set of fact pattern presents itself again, you're back in that situation immediately, and you're probably not engaging that person in the same way. Another example I'll give you of bias, and bias is not always bad, right? I told you I went to an all-girl high school. I'm proud of that. I enjoyed that experience. I have some perspectives on what I think women who had an all-female experience, how they show up, right? Whether it's in college, high school, wherever. Now, if I'm in a social setting and I meet someone else who's had that experience, and I immediately connect with them because I'm like, oh, they're like me, they had that experience. That's fine. There's probably no, you know, consequence negative for that, unless I suddenly ignore everybody else and only focus on that person, which would be pretty rude. But if I'm in the process of hiring and I look at someone's resume and I see that experience and I prioritize them because they have that shared experience with me, that is a negative consequence of bias, right? I have actually disadvantaged other people who didn't have the same experience. So it's just important to know and understand when you have those biases. So I know I have that bias, so I don't look at certain things when I'm looking at resumes. I don't look to see whether the person's had that experience, because what matters to me in a social setting isn't the same as what should matter in terms of hiring the best person for a job. I would say, as far as why corporate entities are very focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and while it may seem like it only happened in the last 2 years, you know, there are leaders in this space who have been doing this for 20 plus years. And I applaud them, because it takes a lot of tenacity to really commit to, you know, being in that marathon of change. But the reason it actually has probably grown in prominence, particularly in the last 2 years, a lot of it, you know, I'd say there was a peak in the middle of the pandemic, where many of us in the US and North America, but certainly across the globe, had the opportunity to watch, you know, the murder of George Floyd. And it really, for the first time, it's not the first time that fact pattern existed, but for the first time, we were all sort of in our homes and forced to look at it, right? It's like turning a mirror on yourself and realizing that indeed things had not gotten as much better as we thought it would. In addition, I think particularly in the US and elsewhere, the demographics have changed. And so if you are focused on your business and thinking about your consumers and who your clients and customers are, and the demographics of those customers have changed, you need to also make sure that the composition of your workforce and the way that you're going about your work and design those customers. And so that's why you're seeing, you know, corporate entities like the one I work for really focused on looking at our employee base and making sure that the teams that we have that are interfacing with our customers and clients represent that diversity, and that as people are building out products and services, that it also does the same. I know there are other speakers, so I'm going to free up some time, but I want to leave you with one analogy, and I caveat it this way to say this. I am not a master baker. However, if you think about baking a loaf of bread or baking a cake, you know that the sequencing in which you put in the ingredients actually determines the outcome. And so I think of diversity as the ingredients that are going into the bowl as you're mixing the dough or kneading the dough, or as you're putting the cake, and you put them in a certain sequence, understanding the uniqueness of each of those ingredients and how they amplify each other. That process of mixing those ingredients together in a way that brings out the beauty and the value of all of them at the same time, muting some, strengthening others, that's inclusion, right? Inclusion is not the fancy glaze that you put on the bread at the end. It is not the icing that you put on top at the end to make it all look pretty and appeal to a certain audience. So you have to be thinking about it throughout. You have to understand all the ingredients that you have. You have to understand what motivates them, what amplifies them, and what brings out their best, and then combine them and bring them together and create an environment in your bowl, whatever your bowl might be, that allows them all to thrive. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you sort of the approach that I take. It might be fairly existential, but these are the concepts and the approach that we take. It's super important that you know all that you have, that you're thinking with the end in mind, but that you're creating an environment where people can thrive.
Thank you, Wendy. Really appreciate that. I think we're off to an excellent start. And now I'm going to invite Rotarian Kerryann to share with us some of her lived experiences. How has she experienced Rotary? Is there disability inclusion in Rotary? How have we accommodated her? And how has it helped her to be more engaged as a club member?
Good evening again, everyone. And I am so excited and pleased to be here. And the reason for that is this is not my first rodeo in terms of discussing diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is, however, the first time that I've attended one of these meetings where we didn't do what Wendy just spoke about and treat it as though it was the icing on top of the cake, where we discussed diversity, equity. We talk about all the people that need to be included, and then we blatantly excluded a part of the community. And this is once that it hasn't happened. So yay, I'm glad I'm an ingredient and not an icing. Mind you, I like icing too. My lived experiences. Now, as a person living with a disability, my experience with service clubs has come for the most part, prior to my becoming a Rotarian, came from being a service recipient. Being the little girl that members of the Lions Club picked up when I had to go to certain activities and didn't have transportation. Lion such and such was dispatched to collect and take me there. The school I attended was largely supported by the Lions Club. And so that was my experience then of service clubs. As I got older and I experienced different things, I became a recipient of my first computer when I was at the Combermere School. And I say that with all pride, Barbadians would know why. And the Kiwanis Club donated their first a computer to me. So again, a service recipient. I never thought of service clubs as wanting people like me. I always felt like the project, the person that was in the camera, that was the recipient. I was happy to get those rides from the Lions Club. I was ecstatic to have a computer. It was wonderful to have those opportunities to interact. And as I grew older, as I interacted with different agencies and entities, I still became a part of their project. Some years ago, I received a letter in the mail inviting me to become an honorary Rotarian. This was after I'd become a member of the Senate. And I said to myself, another opportunity for somebody to look good by having a token disabled person. But something bade me attend, and I went. I didn't feel like the project that evening. I felt like a welcomed person, and I felt like a person. Nobody asked me questions related to disability. They asked me things about my life in the Senate. We talked about shoes. We talked about a whole host of different things because, you know, us girls, we love our pretty shoes. And I think I had on some very nice heels that evening. And we got into that kind of a discussion. And I thought to myself, maybe I found somewhere where I won't be a project. When I became a full-fledged Rotarian, from the first day, the first conversation with my Rotarian colleagues and family, I knew that this was somewhere where I finally would belong and no longer be treated as just that object. People stopped and talked, not about my blindness, but about me. They wanted my opinion. Did I like this? Was that? When we have our Christmas hamper packing, I was not made to feel like an obligatory person. There were things found that I could participate in, support, and assist. Now, let me pause. You might say, well, why would that be important? It is extremely important when you turn up that you know that you're not just here because they wanted to have somebody to make them look good. To say that, yes, we're meeting our quotas. Yes, we have our tokens of whatever, but they're just there. I went to an activity with Rotary once, and I think one of the Rotarians in the end, they completely forgot that I was blind. And they said, Kerryann, you see that thing over there? Pass it to me. And I started laughing. I said, actually, I think I need to change my shades because I don't see it right now. And it said, you're such a clown. But that was a phenomenal feeling. And it was a phenomenal feeling because of that. The fact that I had become just a Rotarian. Now, that has not always been my experience. And the thing about living with one of the so-called diversities, being a part of the diverse, wider community, is that we are different. We do have different needs. We do have different issues and challenges. And it's not always easy to be the person to have to point out that something needs to be made accessible. Last year, we used to get the Rotarian magazines in print, and we started bemoaning the fact that so many of the printed copies were sticking around and we needed to go online. Well, I went and I finally signed up for the online magazine. I did it to save a tree because I don't read a printed one. And if I could stop having a printed one sent, then that's a good thing, I thought. I did not expect to be able to read the Rotarian magazine because most electronic media is not designed with persons who use access technology in mind. Well, imagine my shock when I finally decided. The first one showed up in my inbox. I didn't bother to look at it. The second one showed up in my inbox. I had an idle minute. I said, I'll go take a look. And I did. And I was so excited because I was able to read about what was going on in Rotary clubs all over the world. I was able to learn about our Rotarian history, to learn about the questions being asked of different Rotarians. And I was excited because the magazine had been designed, whether intentionally or unintentionally, with access technology in mind. That's been my experience in Rotary. In my time with the Senate, I faced a lot of different issues and challenges. And the biggest issue is the one that I ended with just now, and that is access. How do you access printed material? The first day I turned up at Parliament, we got these lovely sets of minutes and all of these bills to read and no accessible formats. I asked for electronic copy because my theory is nobody types anything on a manual typewriter anymore. So there has to be an electronic copy of this somewhere. And I started hunting. I found myself having to call the Chief Parliamentary Counsel's office to get electronic copies of bills. I had to hunt down personally a lot of different things. And I thought, this is not good enough. And the clerk of Parliament I had a meeting with him and I said, these are the things that I need. And he went out and took my advice and he started acquiring the correct technologies. When I became president of the Senate, they also made sure that the computer in my office was outfitted to suit my needs. The staff at Parliament made it their business to ensure that different places became accessible. The Parliament buildings are being refurbished at the moment. The last time that I was there and they were being used, the elevator had Braille in it. The ramp had been made properly, and different steps were being taken to make it way better. Unfortunately, there was a time when the elevator was out for over a year. Not our fault. Thank goodness I could walk up and down the steps, but the point is that they were able to start making provisions. When I became president of the Senate, they made temporary provisions that my guests that were wheelchair users could be included, accommodated as part of the experience. Those are the things that we really needed to see and have. But there were other challenges. And the other challenges were that too often I became, or at least I felt like the token in the meeting. When people said, oh, sorry, I'll send you the agenda afterwards, as though I didn't need to know what was going on in the meeting while it was happening. Or the time that somebody said to me, oh, we weren't able to get it put into Braille. I didn't need it in Braille. I just needed an electronic copy. And on the challenges would go from time to time in various fora. I'd like to say that things have improved. And I am happy to say that they have. I can also say that there has been change in the landscape of my country and across the world and in different places and spaces. But there's a lot more that needs to be done. And it all starts with the human interaction. I remember one day, I won't name the name, but the individual is present and knows who they are. Actually, there are two of them present. One of them, for a long time, has been working with a particular project, inclusive play. That project is near and dear to us in Rotary Club of Barbados South because it's a place where children with and without disabilities will be able to come together. We are living and working for the day when that project will see fruition so that all children can be included. Another time, one of the most beautiful experiences I had was when my time for service started and the then director of service projects couldn't decide what to do with me. And they called up my sponsor and said, what am I going to do? And my sponsor paid me the biggest compliment that anybody could pay. My sponsor said to the person, ask her yourself. If you want to be more diverse and inclusive, don't make plans for people. Ask them yourself. Find out what their needs are. Find out how can we make things better for you? How can we make it more inclusive? What do you need so that you feel as a partner sitting down to our table with us? And then do it. And that is how you live diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you.
Wow. I don't know. Is there an applause button? Oh my gosh. Thank you very much, Rotarian Kerryann. I think the bar is going higher and higher. I think we're off to a brilliant start, and that was very powerful. I had to hold back some tears, but really powerful testimony. And I think a great segue to our final speaker, our special speaker, RI Director and Vice President Valarie. I turn the session to you to bring us home.
Thank you, Katrina, and thank you so much for inviting me. Every time I'm on a panel or I have an opportunity to hear from others, I leave the meeting more learned and more exposed to people's experience that help shape us all. And I think that's one of the beauties of some of these panel discussions. Wendy, you did such a great job of starting us off with great definitions and overview, and that's so important message that, you know, we really need to help others understand that we need to be able to show up as our true authentic selves, and that's when we bring our best, and that's when we contribute our best. And Kerryann, you know, you just hit on something that we practiced in our work. So I was a Tim Horton franchisee, a franchise restaurant owner in Toronto for many, many years. And we built a very inclusive culture and of people with disabilities of all types in all areas of employment. And we practiced something that we called ATP, ask the person. And you just hit on that right then. We never assume what accommodations people need. We need to have that conversation. We need to involve them in the solutions. And so, you know, your words really resonated with me, and I'm so thrilled that Rotary is lucky enough to have you and your insights and your knowledge, and continue to push us to become more inclusive and provide those accommodations that we all need at some time in our life in Rotary. So yes, I get the opportunity now, I guess, as Katrina said, of bringing it home. And I'm really thrilled to be able to really share with you that, as Wendy said, in corporations around the world, DEI is a very important component. And it's so important to build not only that diverse and inclusive environment, but also to build that environment of retention and teamwork, where we want to stay, we want to be part of something, that we feel welcomed and that we feel like we can really contribute. And I'm so thrilled that Rotary has made it our priority to DEI, to ensure that we do reflect those communities, that not only that we serve, but that we're inclusive of people, and we want them to join Rotary as well. And, you know, we have recognized that individuals from certain groups have historically experienced barriers, membership, to participation in Rotary, and to leadership. And so this commitment and work that we're doing in Rotary is going to help us thrive into the next century, because this is so important to our generation, but certainly the generation after that, after us. And in order to be relevant in the next century, we're heading into our 117th birthday next month. And so that in itself is a huge accomplishment, but we need to make sure that we are thriving into the next century. And if we think and reflect upon our four-way test, we know that our organization is creating an organization that is fair to all, that builds goodwill, and that benefits our communities in so many ways. So when we talk about what the board of directors is doing as far as our commitment to DEI, we also know that it's not a top-down effort, right? Because the change in culture, the change that is necessary, is going to happen at the club and the district level. And our members are the faces in their community. They're the faces that are inviting those members to come in and look to join us in service and membership. So it's so important that we start with our members. We know that having that leadership is important, because I call it tone from the top, right? We sometimes we need that permission to get going. We need to know that we are supported in this journey, these difficult conversations that are ensue when we go on this journey. And so we need to know that we are supported. And that's really what the RI board, their reasoning in starting the DEI task force was. And the DEI task force is a group of members and non-members, Rotaractors, a Peace Scholar, with professional DEI experience. And one of the things, we put out a call out for our members to apply to be on the task force. And having worked in an environment with people with disabilities, and my husband is deaf, we recognized that we didn't have anyone apply who had a disability. And after we did our survey results, and I'll speak to that in a few minutes, we saw that opportunity, that people with disabilities didn't feel that they had that equitable chance to be members or to be leaders in our organization. So we've added a person from South Africa, Jeremy Opperman, who is blind, and who has really helped us, again, with some of that technology and some of that perspectives that we really need to take into account, that we don't have that lived experience and we don't need those accommodations, not all of us do. So some of the work that the task force has done is to really advise the board, but also provide tools and support and guidance to our clubs and districts, where, as I said, that true change will really happen. So I invite you, if you haven't, there's a great new landing page at Rotary International on all of our DEI resources. It was just released in the last 2 weeks. But one of the things we did was we strengthened our DEI statement, and we made it a commitment. And we say that we know that people hold visible and invisible qualities that inherently make us unique. And we strive to create that inclusive culture where everybody knows that they feel valued and belong. And that's right in our commitment statement. What I really like about our commitment statement is the honesty. And the honesty is that we are committed, and we will be honest and transparent about where we are in this journey. And we know we can do better. We know we need to continue, and we know we need to continue to learn as well. And that's, again, that's something that we events like tonight really help us bring that together. We developed a code of conduct because we know as we start in this journey, you know, we're going to hear a lot more people act as upstanders, as we should, and not have this behavior that we've seen in our clubs, inappropriate jokes, as we were talking about, the bias. And so really encouraging that respectful language in our interaction and reminding us how to be supportive of each other and create that welcoming environment where we can celebrate diversity in our clubs, but also in our communities. So those are some of the first steps we took, but we also wanted to hear from our members. And so we partnered with PwC and we launched our first ever survey to assess the current state of what our members thought, what are their experiences. And we had more than 31,000 Rotarians from over 121 countries respond to the survey. And the numbers that responded are typical of some of our global surveys. And in itself, when we relaunch it in a couple of years, we will actually have some data that more people are willing to participate, more people want their voice to be heard. So there's so much learning that we can do from every aspect of launching a survey. But the feedback that we got was rich and it was really eye-opening. And overall, there was 8 key themes that emerged from that assessment and the respondents to our survey. And in the next month, you'll actually be getting a communication from myself if you did participate in the survey. And it's a communication going back highlighting what the survey said, recognizing that we are listening and that we are going to incorporate some of these things into our work going forward. So I just wanted to highlight some of those themes that came forward. You know, one of them was that no matter what country people were from, whether you were Rotaractors, Rotarians, leadership, everybody is committed to improving Rotary's culture, and they believe in harnessing the power of DEI to further our impact in our service, in our membership, etc. And that was really exciting because that supports the main reason why we're doing this, right? To make us an even stronger and more relevant organization today and in the future. And we also heard that everybody's experience around DEI varies across the globe, and that's pretty obvious. I mean, DEI is going to look different in Japan than it looks in America, than it may look in the Caribbean, than it looks in Europe. But we also know that that can look different in 2 clubs in the same town, right? They can have different dynamics, offer different experiences. So it's really no surprise that our respondents told us that DEI looks different around the regions. While members support a focus on DEI, the respondents told us they don't really fully understand what our vision around DEI was. And again, not really surprising. This is pretty new to us. And so what we're doing is we're making a concentrated effort to communicate our vision of DEI. And you've probably noticed that it's been consistent messaging in our Rotary magazine, in blog posts, in webinars, and all communications from Rotary International. So this will help just really support our members again and help them understand where Rotary and the leadership of Rotary is, and hearing those personal stories as well, those personal stories about the successes of clubs and how it's changed them, how they've attracted new members, how they've retained their members is a really key part as well. Another theme that emerged was that we have a narrow leadership profile as far as advancing in Rotary, and that, you know, if you don't fit into that traditional profile, you feel you don't have, there's limited opportunities for leadership roles. And so, you know, it's really interesting because the conversation is happening at committee work at Rotary International right now to kind of ensure that we are not just talking about the amount of time you're in Rotary or tenure-based promotions or opportunities, but more around your skill set and what you bring professionally as well from outside of our organization. And that's just going to make us stronger. So all of those themes and others really helped guide the task force and will guide the task force. We've developed a 3-year action plan roadmap with strategic priorities that are really going to help support our clubs and members. But we also know, as I'm sure Wendy and Kerryann can attest to, it's not going to happen overnight. And so as a global organization, it's going to look different all around the world from country to country. And some areas might focus on gender equity, others may focus on generational gaps. So it's going to look different around the world. But it is a collective effort, and we each have a role to play in this. And your leadership will lay the foundation for building and strengthening our environment of inclusion and equity. And it's just, you know what, we're going to be stronger when we each are respected for who we are, and we're able to show up, we're able to feel valued, and we're able to contribute in equity. So I quite often get asked, what can we do at the club and district level? And it's really not that hard. It's all about looking, as we did on the task force, look to see who we are before we can move forward. And I think that's really an important part at our club level. We need to look and we need to have those conversations internally before we reach out and invite others to join us, because we need to know who we are. You know, it can be simple as just, you know, having a conversation about, you know, what do you do for a living, or, you know, what's your family dynamic? I mean, we talked about visible and invisible disabilities. You can see who I am, Kerryann. I'm a white woman with white hair and blue eyes. I know, you know, I just want to give you that visual description, but you might not know that I'm a middle child, which really affected me. I'm just kidding. But, you know, and I have Ukrainian heritage. So, you know, I bring all that with me every single day, but we don't always see that. And that's true of our members in our clubs. We need to have these true, authentic conversations. We need to speak out respectfully, and we need to hold ourselves and others accountable in Rotary and outside of Rotary. Then, you know, we need to invite local diversity, equity, inclusion experts to speak to our clubs and to hear these stories like we're hearing tonight. And then we need to really encourage those who haven't had that chance to leadership really within our positions in our clubs and our districts. We need to tap them on the shoulder. We need to encourage them to put their name forward, and we need to support them and give them the tools that they need to have an equitable chance to leadership. So, I mean, District 7030, you have an amazing DEI committee. Reach out to them. And I know that they have the great resources. They'll help you through it. And I'm just so encouraged about the changes, the cultural changes I'm already seeing, the conversations I'm already having around the world in a very short period of time because of champions like you. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think that's great information to bring it to the perspective of Rotary. Starting out really wide at the top with Wendy, Kerry giving us her experience, and now just really zoning in on what we as Rotary clubs can do. So I know that I'm not the only person curious. I do have some questions that I took careful note of as you all spoke, but I think I would invite our audience, fellow Rotarians, to pose your questions. I already see one in the chat, and I think it goes to you, Vice President Valarie. It speaks about whether or not we can make the code of conduct part of the Rotary rules. I don't know if you know the answer to that one. It's a multi-part question, so I'm gonna go to all of them. There it is. And what is the standard protocol for club level to address breaches in DEI and discrimination? You know, I'm going to stop there because the third question I will answer, but it's those two I'll pose to you. Can the code of conduct be made part of the club rules? And what is the standard protocol, if any, for at the club level to address breaches in DEI discrimination?
Well, those are really great questions, and thank you so much for that. And absolutely, the code of conduct, you'll find it on the Rotary International website. And, you know, it really is about the expectations of us as participants in Rotary. And it's around, you know, just using respectful language, how to be supportive, how to create that environment that's successful and safe, and how to celebrate our diversity. But yes, the second part of the question is around a code of conduct as well. So certainly you can adopt it in your club. You can alter it a little bit if it really relates to certain aspects that you have concerns about. But we will run into situations where people are not acting in the expectations around the four-way test, around our code of conduct before our DEI conduct, and really just about the values of Rotary International. And so, you know, we do have a very strong and robust adult harassment policy as well that I would suggest that you review. It does fall in line sometimes with some of the situations that we do deal with at Rotary. So there's some very strict protocols around our adult harassment issue. Never put yourself in a situation where you are feeling that you are unable to answer the question, that it has gone beyond, you know, a respectful conversation where it's an education. Let's face it, we need to bring people along on this journey, and some are willing to listen and it's about the education. And then there are others who really want to politicize this and say that, you know, this is a political issue and Rotary International shouldn't be going there. So I encourage you not to put yourself in a situation where you feel that you're being put into a, you know, an uncomfortable or harassment situation. Rotary International is there to help you. It's either our club and district support, or we have a new website for inquiries called dei.inquiries@rotary.org. So they are there to help you in any difficult situation. But the code of conduct is a great tool to help our leadership promote our expectations of our members.
Thank you. And I want to just note that the district team has actually placed links to the code of conduct and to the new statement in the chat, so you can pick those links up and, you know, check out the resources and check out that information as well. And the third part of that question was, can there be at the local level training, awareness, and DEI at the club level, cluster, and member level? And the answer is a resounding yes. And that's what we plan to do throughout the remainder of this Rotary year and into the next Rotary year. And of course, there are courses already available that Rotary has created, and you can access those and do them together as a club without having to reinvent the wheel. But we certainly will, as a district, continue to provide more information, do more of these discussions, do, you know, sensitization and awareness training going on for the next few months. So the answer is yes. See if there's any other question.
Just to let you know that the board and senior leadership of Rotary is going through the same training on an ongoing basis.
Excellent. So there is a question. I keep forgetting that I'm quickly aging, so let me just put my glasses on. District 7030 does have DEI issues, especially economic, racism, gender, LGBTQ. We need specific strategies to address these as well as universally. I agree with that. I think that was a statement more than a question. And the question below it says, can we train our membership and stakeholders on DEI responsibly and standards? By who and when? And can the district roll it out and make it happen? It's coming. Just sit tight. We will be sharing some more information shortly about what we're planning to do immediately, and then for the longer term, what are some of the training and discussion opportunities that we will be providing at the district level. I have been told that Rotarian Marcel has his hands up. Rotarian Marcel, you have a question. You are on mute.
There we go. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good evening to everyone. Mine is more not necessarily a question, it's more a comment really, or an experience, I should say. And it's actually twofold. One is actually serving on a committee here at the Rotary Club of Barbados South with Kerryann. When asked, Kerryann just put her hand up, said I'll be secretary of the committee. And it just flowed from there, just a member of the team, and it was excellent, I must say, going forward. To this day, she serves us extremely well. The other point I want to make is I had the opportunity years ago to lecture some individuals, say between the ages of about maybe 18 to 40. And one afternoon, one gentleman joined our class, and he was a little unkempt. His hair not combed. You can see, that he was having a pretty rough life. And so when he sat in the room, everyone sort of, moved away from him. And so I was thinking, how can I get this gentleman, to be a part of the class, a part of the group? And so it was actually an accounting class. And so I just say his name would say Brathwaite, for example. And so I figured, okay, let me start the next example with Brathwaite and Company. And I figured one of the better ways to do this is to ensure that Brathwaite and Company was actually prosperous. So there was I talking about all the profits, etc., that Brathwaite and Company was actually making. And when I looked back into the room, what really startled me was very exciting. When I saw, because I mentioned just when he sat, everyone sort of moved away from him. I sort of gave him a space in the corner. And then I saw everyone, like sharing a pencil, sharing a pen, sharing a book, and actually including him then in the class. At the end of the session, he did not get an A. He actually got a C. But to be honest with you, I've lectured hundreds of students, and he is the one that stands out to me, because afterwards he came to me and he said, "Sir, you're the first person." He was actually about 18 or 19 years old, and then he then related to me that he had about 2 or 3 jobs at that point in time, because he had 2 young ladies pregnant. He was only 18 or 19 years old. And so with that, he said, "Sir, you're one of the first people in my life who actually believed in me." And so I just thought I would just put that into the group in terms of, the whole inclusion part of our experience, because we never know what action we take or what decision we make daily would actually affect the life of someone else. And chances are it may be positive or it could be negative. So actually, that's just my contribution this afternoon, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Rotarian Marcel. Thank you for that contribution. And I see our district team is very, very busy. They've posted expand your knowledge and increase your ability to facilitate positive discussions about our DEI issues. So there's also a link. So please check the chat before you log off. There's a treasure trove of information there. We have a question come in. Some of the older Rotarians are reluctant to admit non-professional persons as members. This social class bias can cause issues when proposals are made on behalf of persons who do not fit the traditional Rotary profile. I think it is a statement, but it's certainly, I think, a topic that we can perhaps expand on, because as we try to expand our membership in Rotary, that's been one of the fundamental changes that I have seen since I've been involved with Rotary. We've talked about, we've moved away from the perception of being only a club of captains of industry to a club that welcomes and really embraces everyone. And we're talking about diversity, and it's not just gender, it's not just abilities, but we're talking about intergenerational diversity. We're talking about diversity all across the spectrum. So I don't know, Vice President Valarie, if you'd like to kind of expand on that in terms of the changing profile of Rotary members across the globe.
Yeah, I mean, Rotary looks different around the world. I mean, there are places in the world where you still are, as you say, the captains of your industry or the CEO. And that's not necessarily true in North America. I think one of the pieces of our statement and DEI that we quite often overlook is socioeconomics, right? The socioeconomic piece of equity and equitable opportunities. And in Rotary, I think, even during COVID, it's really opened our opportunities to meet in this format. And, quite often people say, well, I can't join Rotary, it's too expensive. And it's not always, it's certainly not usually Rotary International dues, it's club dues plus the cost of a meal. And so I think, I always say people shouldn't be excluded from Rotary because of the cost of a meal. And, some of our large clubs, I know our club in Toronto meets at a very exclusive hotel. And I think the price tag of a lunch on Friday is upwards around $45. And then that's even before your parking, downtown Toronto. So it's obvious that a lot of people that may be starting out their career that would be excellent Rotarians, that would want to network, that would contribute to our clubs, can't necessarily afford that at a certain time in their life. So I think we have the opportunity during COVID to recognize that we have different ways of meeting. We have a lot of cause-based clubs starting out where perhaps shared interest is a reason to maybe start a new satellite club or a cause-based club. So I think that it's really made us look at Rotary through a whole new lens. And I think that that's a really good thing.
Thank you very much. And I see there don't know all the questions yet, but there's one really great comment from our president in Dominica. President Lee is suggesting she has no question, but she just wants to share that their club learned from the beginning. Put here to understand that we were all different, and we try to respect this by listening and finding solutions, what works best for all of us, not just what is easy. Still, we have 8 Europeans, 3 Americans, 10 Caribbean nationals, 10 males, 13 females, ages between 30 and 80, and it taught them to keep an open mind and to find strong points of each other, to be a successful club. So thank you very much, President Lees, for sharing that experience with us. I'm going to give members of the audience just a couple more minutes to come up with some more questions, but I have a couple of questions here, and I'm going to start with you, Wendy, because you've been very quiet, and all of the questions are going to Vice President Valarie. Wendy, what would you say has been the most where have you experienced the most resistance to DEI in your organization, and how did you and your team respond?
Sure, and so I'm going to answer it in this way, which is not a deflection, but it's super important to understand that every organization is a set of a broader ecosystem, right? There's no ecosystem, no company that doesn't have all of the perspectives that exist in the broader society. And so I think that the solutions, you can't approach it. I mean, in the organization, you have maybe, you have rules, and much like Rotary, right? You have code of conduct and other things that allow you to define some parameters around certain things, but you have to take the same type of care that you would take in the public domain and with your family and friends and others when you disagree into any interaction. I think the many of the issues probably all fall into this category. Sometimes it's really hard for us as human beings when we are working on a solution that maybe benefits a particular group to not fall into what I describe as whataboutemeism. And the truth is, like so many other things, you will not please everyone all the time while you are doing this type of work. But you can please everyone at different points in time, right? And address their specific needs, right? And because you might be focused on one part of your body does not mean that you're ignoring another, right? So if this is another, I speak a lot in analogies because I think sometimes it takes the emotion out of it, right? If you, fall and were to hit your knee, and your knee were in pain, and you were like, you wouldn't then like nurse your elbow, right? To make your elbow feel like I hadn't forgotten about you and the value that you bring. But a lot of times when you're doing, this type of work, people kind of make you feel like you have to do that, right? And to make sure that no one feels like they're somehow being ignored, but the pain is actually happening in another place. And so that is back to that whole point that I was trying to make about equality is not about like trying to address all of these different needs at exactly the same time. There are times where different aspects of your community or groups are going to be, hurting more than others, and you have to focus on that particular need. So I'd say that's probably the biggest piece, because you want everyone, when you're trying to lead inclusively, you want everyone to feel like they're being heard and their needs are being met. The reality is, though, from a practical standpoint, you might not actually be able to meet everyone's needs at exactly the same time, right? And so it's super important to be, you have to be able to listen. You have to be able to create safe environments where, someone can voice that objection, because that person who is saying, well, what about me, right? They have needs. right? And so it's not that you're saying, no, not now, but you have to have the ability to listen and say, well, tell me more about what specifically, you're looking for in this moment, and how I might be able to address your need. I'll use a slightly controversial one. So occasionally, when you are doing, work on behalf of the LGBTQ+ community, there will be others who will say, that work that you're doing violates my religious beliefs, right? And really what you have to do in that moment is also create an environment where you can share. And by the way, I'm of deep religious faith, so I'm not actually just speaking about it like I'm speaking about others, but you have to help people understand that we anchor on different dimensions of our diversity, right? And our identity is defined by different things. And so just as much as that person might want their religious beliefs to be valued, that person from the LGBTQ+ community wants that aspect and dimension of their identity to be valued. No one person is more right than the other, right? And if you come at it from a people-centered approach and you're really focused on the person, you can figure out a way to have a discussion that isn't about violating anyone's beliefs or compromising anyone's belief. And it's not about changing anyone's belief either, right? That's an essential aspect of this. Agreement is not always the goal.
Thank you.
Understanding is the goal.
Well, thank you. That's good. Kerryann, you have also been quiet, so I have a question for you. I think you've mentioned this in your delivery, but if you could give the clubs and the members of the clubs listening right now one piece of advice as to how to make their clubs truly inclusive, what would that be?
First of all, what I would do, sorry, let me center myself better here. Right. So what I was saying is what I would advise clubs to do is, again, what I said before, ask the persons, make your club more welcoming to other people. If you want to invite more persons to your meetings who are, let's say, from the community of persons with disabilities, look at where you're holding your meetings. Now that most of us are having virtual meetings, who are you reaching out to? Are you reaching out to invite persons who may otherwise not have been able to access your meetings? I think when we go back into face-to-face interactions, examine what you're going to be doing at those sessions. One of the things that I always loved about Rotary is we were invited to deliver. I was asked to speak about myself and to speak about disabilities at Rotary Club meetings more than once before I became an actual Rotarian. And even then, the atmosphere was a welcoming and encouraging one. Another aspect that is definitely one is I saw in the chat someone was mentioning the socioeconomic barriers to becoming a full-fledged Rotarian for some. And that is a reality for some persons, especially those living in diverse communities, because many of us do live on fixed small incomes. And when you look at service clubs, you think, okay, that may be a little outside of my price range to be a part of. How can we, now I'm not saying to create different tiers in terms of financial, because that then leads to other issues and questions and queries, but how can we be more accommodating, inclusive? How can we be more aware of some of these needs that persons may be having? Why aren't people from different economic brackets desirous to join our organization? Those kinds of things I think we need to look at and examine how we can best address those things.
Thank you very much, Kerryann. Last question, because I think we're nearing our end in time. But there's a question, simple action, as in the club meeting open in prayer. Most clubs use the Christian term for God or end in. Is this a DEI? In other words, can we find a way to use a term that is not, specific to one religion versus the other. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. Anybody from the panel wanting to respond to that?
I think it all starts with having a conversation among your members. I mean, I think we've all been in a room where a Christian prayer has been said and you turn around and there's a Sikh at the back of the room, or there's a person, you know, that clearly, you know, is not participating, and it's uncomfortable. But I've seen a lot of clubs struggle with this, and it's because they don't sit down and have the conversation and look at it from everybody's perspectives. So, you know, I see a lot of clubs go to inspirational thought, a Rotary moment, you know, so we can actually get to know each other even a little bit, just hearing different perspectives. And there's a lot of non-denominational invocations that we can use as well.
Excellent, thank you for that. And we have Rotarians in the audience suggesting ways that we can perhaps make an alternative, you know, starting with 30 minutes of silence. Somebody suggested changing instead of God or supreme being. So lots of suggestions there. So I think this as we said at the start, is the very beginning of the conversations that we plan to have on DEI in the district for the next few months. And I think I speak for myself, but I also speak for the audience to say that I have truly enjoyed this last hour of this interaction. And just before I hand the session back to our district trainer, and you know, I want to say I think it's been a very insightful and rich discussion, and I promised that I was going to share with you some of the thoughts that we in the district have been collating and what we plan to do next. And I'm just going to premiere a video that we will circulate now that we've had this session to all of your club presidents, just to kind of to give a summary of what we're doing for DEI in this district. So
diversity can be described as many things: culture, ethnicity, religion. But in its simplest form, diversity is life and all the things that makes it beautiful. Diversity should be celebrated, encouraged, and supported, and it is up to us to make it happen. At Rotary, in the past, enough hasn't been done to foster diversity, but we are actively remedying this. We are removing barriers so that diversity can thrive, and we are creating environments which provide previously disadvantaged groups to join, participate, and lead more in Rotary. In District 7030, we are committed to advancing equity in all aspects of our clubs. We must choose a DEI champion, check for biases by completing a standardized DEI assessment, raise our own awareness through education, take action, and pursue DEI initiatives. Together, we can contribute to a more diverse space where people unite and take action to create lasting change across the globe, in our communities, and in ourselves.
and that completes my planned discussion this evening. Looking forward to many more interactions with members of the district. If anyone wants to volunteer to be that DEI champion in their club, I'm going to encourage you to put your hand up and speak to your club president. As I said, we will be communicating with the club presidents and boards shortly, sharing this video and asking them how we can, at the club level, execute those 4 steps that we just highlighted in the video. But very happy if we want to be champions and to take it forward. If you would like to be that champion, I'm happy to have you on board as we work through the initiatives and training going forward. So the district trainer, Luana, I'm going to hand the session back over to you and wish everybody good night.
Thank you, PP Katrina. Well, what a wonderful hour we just concluded. Rotarian Kerryann, I remain in absolute awe of you. Wendy, your statement that we anchor on different dimensions of our diversity is the most powerful thing I've heard this week. So thank you. That is my big takeaway from all that you've said this afternoon. And last but not least, Vice President Valarie, thank you for being such a powerful voice for DEI in Rotary. Thank you so much. I'm sure that the rest of us, if you do not already practice tolerance, that you will see the importance of ensuring that there are no barriers within and outside of Rotary as we leave this session this afternoon. I would like to ask PAG Balmati to kindly deliver the vote of thanks on our behalf.
Thank you, Luana. On behalf of our district training team, it is my pleasant duty this evening to deliver the vote of thanks. We have been honored 3 times over to have as our panelists 3 highly esteemed professionals with many years' experience in diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, each in her own unique way, bringing a different perspective to the table. I am sure you all will agree that the presentations and discussions far exceeded our expectations, and that we are all richer in knowledge of this topic and better prepared to deal with the related issues in our clubs, our workplace, our communities, and our social life. So to RI Director and RI Vice President Valarie, to Wendy, the head of the Office of Global Diversity and Inclusion at Fidelity Investments, and Kerryann, oh my, she had my hair raising on my body when she spoke and gave us those examples. Kerryann, Disability Rights Consultant, a heartfelt thank you. Thank you for your very impactful presentations, all 3 presenters. Thanks to Past President Katrina, our district DEI chair, so appropriately chosen for her role as moderator, taking us so smoothly through the session, and to the planning committee and all of you present for your attention and your attendance and participation. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you, PAG Balmati, and I will give District Governor Sonia the honor of having the last word. But before DG Sonia comes on, I'd like to welcome PDG Lyle, who I just noticed had joined us. PDG, welcome. DG Sonia?
So I told you we had an esteemed panel, but I didn't know what we were in for tonight. I didn't know the extent. I knew we were going to be blown away, but this has me breathless. So DEI definitely is on the agenda for District 7030. We have a fabulous team leading us in that regard. And I am so thrilled that we had these panelists this evening. I am just extremely happy. The conversation has been rich. The content definitely was where we needed to be as a district, and the conversation has been started. We can only go better from here. So take it back to your clubs, take it back to your communities, because this is not just a Rotary thing, this is a life thing. So DEI is here to stay, and I really thank Katrina for pulling together this program and for the district team for facilitating, but most especially to the panelists. All of you, I'm extremely grateful for you to be here. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.